Okay, thanks so much for coming to the session. I think that I want to start by just sort of explaining the goal in this unit. This is basically a unit that I've taught a bunch of times, and I want to present the unit to you. I figure like to teach it in the classroom, it's probably like, 2 to 5 periods. So I should be able to get through the whole thing now. And basically, it attempts to address the question of the Torah Shebaal, which I think is an issue that really concerns people and students. And I think it's important to frame what the question is that I'm trying to answer before I give the answer, because I once didn't do that, and at the end of the whole unit, didn't address any of the questions that people had. So the question is really, I believe in the Torah Shebaal. I believe that God revealed Himself on Har Sinai. He wrote the Torah. It's written. That's proof. I sort of think that it's a little bit hard to understand why people are so strongly believing in Torah Shebaal, because it's written and not Torah Shebaal. But in any case, people believe and accept the written. Okay, this is what God said. This is what you can do. But the rabbis, forget it. Whether it's the rabbis who are alive, or the rabbis who are no longer alive, or the rabbis of Chazal, people don't feel confident in the authenticity of the Torah Shebaal, in the rabbis, in the tradition, and they frame it in different ways for different people. Maybe it's, why we have to listen to them? They're not God, or this is the one that I enjoy the most. Is what if they got it wrong? It's almost like we want to be machmir. Like Chazal said the mitzvah is this, but what if they're wrong? How can we be lenient and do something that maybe God doesn't want us to do, and then we're really sinning in the eyes of God? And machloket. They're always arguing. People hate the arguments. Why? Everything's machloket. Everything's a debate. So what's the problem with that? Because then how do we know anything is right? If they disagree about everything, so how do we believe in anything? And really just in general, why is this good? Why is this whole thing good? It seems like it'd be much better if it was clearer, if it was more objective, more divine, more confident in the authenticity of this whole thing. And really, this is what underlies, learning Torah Shebaal, obviously, and also the entire halacha. So it's a pretty significant topic. So the way I like to address it is really by presenting a series of sources, and I think that it's very worthwhile to teach this. These sources, many of them are going to be familiar to you, many of them are well known, but so that's one reason to teach them, because they're important sources, but also I think that when you put them together in a certain way, you can sort of paint a perspective on this issue, which I think could build up the confidence. What I'm not discussing is, maybe the whole Torah was not true. That's a different issue that I'm not going to address. But given that we believe in God and we believe in Torah and Har Sinai, but what about this whole Torah Shebaal situation? So we'll start on page 1, and page 1 is the story about Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara quotes a midrash that when Moshe went up to Har Sinai, he sees God tying these crowns onto all the letters. And he says, Rebbeinu Shalom, what are you doing? And he says, eventually, there will be a person after many generations, Rabbi Akiva, who will darshan the meaning of all these crowns. So Rebbeinu Shalom, God, let me see him. So God gives him a vision of seeing Rabbi Akiva's classroom. He's in the 8th row of the room, and he doesn't know a word that they're saying. He doesn't understand what they were saying. As an aside, I don't know if this is true or not, but I have this assumption that they sat in order of prominence and scholarship. So I'm guessing that that was why say 8th row? He wasn't even placed in the top class. Tashash Kocho, and he became weakened, disheartened. Came on Sheigil Davar Echad Amrlo Talmid Rebbe Min Ayim Echad. They asked him what's the source of halacha, and he said halacha Moshe Sinai Nityash V'Dato, and he felt better. He got a shout out in the shir. And I gathered all these sources, then I spent time thinking I wish we were the first source, okay? So I really like this as the first source. It really like brings everything out very clearly and immediately in a nice story. First of all, I emphasize that it's not a true story. You know, I mean, you know, depending on your perspective on Midrash, but you know, I throw out to the class that it didn't really happen, that Moshe actually had a vision of Rabbi Akiva, and that he conveyed that story, experience, to Yoshua, and you know, passed it along until today. But rather that the Chazal are projecting what would have happened if Moshe would have spoken to God, what would have happened, you know, if we would have had this conversation, which makes the point even stronger that Chazal are sort of saying about themselves that what we do today is completely unrecognizable to Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, this is the whole problem of Masorat, right? That what we do, right, Moshe wouldn't recognize it. That's what Chazal is saying. And they're you know, bringing it up straightforward. And this thing at the end about Allah Moshe Sinai is very like suggestive. Like, you know, what does that mean, Allah Moshe Sinai? Like, just like he heard his name and he felt better. And you know what I'll show you, I think that's the whole point of the unit is to show the authenticity of Torah Shebaal that even if it isn't recognizable, it wouldn't be recognizable to Moshe, it's still authentic from Sinai. But exactly how is a matter of question. Okay, what follows is on page 2. Afilu Masha Talmud Shoel L'Rav Amar Baruch Hu Moshe Shah. That anything, you know, here's Chazal trying to again affirm the authenticity of Torah Shebaal that every question that every student is ever going to ask to his Rebbe, meaning things that are going to develop later, were said at Har Sinai. And again, the question is how literal to take that. Okay, the bottom, you know, I put some sources that I think are a little bit redundant. You know, there are many statements of Chazal where they read into the Torah that references to Torah Shebaal. I think that, okay, so one objective, concrete issue is how do we know that it's authentic? Top of page 2 is a very nice story about a person who comes to convert, and he comes to Hillel Shammai, and he says, "Convert me, but I only accept Torah Shebaal." So, you know, Shammai says, you know, it's unacceptable, and Hillel converts him, and then tries to educate him, and says, you know, the first he does the aleph phase, and the next day he flips all the letters, and then he says, what are you talking about? And Hillel says, you know, your whole belief in what I said yesterday was me. So basically, he was saying, you can't have Torah Shebaal to Torah Shebaal. If you want to have just pristine Torah Shebaal, that ain't Torah Shebaal. So you don't know what the letters mean. You know, maybe Lamed Aleph spells Cain. You know, how do you know what anything means? Because you were told orally how to read the words. So you're accepting an oral tradition. So basically, I mean, I think that it's a nice story, and just like, you know, sort of metaphorically brings out the concept that the thing that compels Torah Shebaal is because you can't not have Torah Shebaal. Then the question is, what is the Torah Shebaal? But at least you're accepting that there is some other source of interpretation and transmission of what the Torah Shebaal means. I put the Kuzari on page 2. You know, he makes the same, you know, that's the point he tries to make, that, you know, in more words, but he says, you know, there are many things in the Torah Shebaal that cannot be understood without some level of interpretation. You know, he says, you know, the Torah says, don't do malacha. Tell me what it means. You know, there's so many things in the Torah that are ambiguous. If you know, I mean, you can take it as a statement of a book of values, but you can take the Torah as a book of halacha. So it's impossible to translate the Torah Shebaal into a book of halacha without some other level of interpretation.
My husband and I were on a trip when we met some Karaite Jews.
Yeah.
And they're telling us that you only believe in Torah Shebaal, okay? And then they started discussing, I forgot what it was. I think it was the idea of mezuzah. And it seems there were two different shittot among Karaite Jews, depending on how you, here's the key word, interpret the pasuk. So, like, you need the oral no matter what.
Right. It's compelling that there needs to be something, and that already is like one step towards well, show me another oral tradition, and then we'll discuss that. Okay, source 7 on page 3, I think is worth looking at, because here is, as far as I know, the most explicit place, a reference to a level of another interpretation, because the Torah talks about shchita, the slaughtering animals, and says zavachta. Rashi says hilchos shchita halacha l'Moshe Sinai. But this is actually, I think, relatively compelling because the Torah actually says kasher tzvicha, and there's no other place in the Torah where there's any other description of zvicha. So clearly, the pasuk is referencing some other communication. So, which we Torah Shebaal that. Okay. And then Chazal, in general, try to find other sources. And this asmachta is really a side point, but it's very interesting. Depending on how expanded you want to get on this topic, but the Ritva, what's asmachta? I mean, it's a sort of a worthwhile side point because it happens in the Gemara all the time, right? They're always quoting psukim, and we don't always describe it as asmachta. But there's a lot of times there's psukim that seem to be interpreted in ways that they don't mean to be saying on the surface. So, the Ritva suggests this possibility that maybe it's like, it's kind of like, I tell my students, like, at the bar mitzvah, when the rabbi says, this pasuk is talking about our bar mitzvah, it doesn't really mean that's the meaning of the pasuk. It's just some, like, mnemonic or metaphoric meaning. And the Ritva says that that's, like, terrible, how can you ever say that? It actually means that everything in Torah Shebaal Peh was intended by God at Sinai. And therefore, asmachta is very, very serious and meaningful and real, that God was actually thinking it. He just didn't communicate it explicitly. He communicated it through the process, but it's actually what God really wanted and intended. I mean, I think it's rather extreme, but it's an interesting point. Okay. Then we come to the Ramban, which I think is very, very worthwhile on this topic. The Ramban, on Lotasor, which, this is, a lot of students might have seen this in Chumash class, but first of all, it's very important to know the idea of Lotasor. That's like one of the Torah mitzvahs to listen to the Chachamim. I didn't put this in, you might want to look at the Rambam, whether it's counted in the Sefer mitzvahs. But he interprets Lo Tasor B'Kol Shagidu Chayamin Small as listen to them, even if you believe that what they're telling you is that they're saying your right hand is your left hand. Meaning, even if you believe what they're saying is the complete opposite of the truth, you're obligated to listen to them because of the pasuk of Lo Tasor, and which is like exactly like sort of like repeating the question of the students of like, what if it's totally wrong? Like that the Ramban is saying. What if it's totally wrong? Ramban said you should believe that they got it right, but if you do think that they got it totally wrong, you should still listen to them. That's the mitzvah of Lo Tasor. And I underline this phrase, Al Adash Lahem Hu Nosei Lahem HaTorah, which he doesn't really elaborate, but Al Adash Lahem, he was giving it based on, as interpreted by Chazal. This is the mitzvah, and you should keep it however you interpret it in the future. I think that's the language of saying, although he doesn't really develop that point. But essentially what he's saying is, whatever they say, the mitzvah is to do whatever they say, even if it's not what I was thinking. Okay. Now I come to Machlokas on page page 2. Source number 12. Here's one of my favorites. So, first of all, the introduction of the concept of Elu Ve'elu Devei Elokim Chayim, in the context of Hillel and Shammai. So, this ritva, I think, is extremely meaningful to students. Elu Ve'elu Devei Elokim Chayim, Shalom Rabbeinu Tzarfas, Heyaf Efsha Sheyu Shneim Devei Elokim Chayim. How is it possible that the two sides of the Machlokas are both truth? V'zeh Oseh, V'zeh Matir. And one says Asr, one says Mutter, they're both right. It's kind of a confusing message. The Tirtzu, Ki Kisha'ala Moshe L'Maro, L'Kabel Torah, Herei Lo Achol Davar V'Davar, Mem Tes Panim L'Isur, U'Mem Tes Panim L'Heter. Kadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe 49 ways on every possible question, 49 ways to say Asr, 49 ways to say Mutter. The Shalach Kadosh Baruch Hu, and Moshe asks God, so it's halacha. V'amar sheyehezem masor lechachmei Yisrael shebechol dor v'dor v'hiyeh hachroa k'mosam. And God says, whatever you guys decide, majority rules. So this I actually think this is a very extreme, sort of the other way, where it's suggesting that God never actually revealed to Moshe. And this is really important, right? God never revealed to Moshe the truth of the halacha. He never said whether it's asur or mutter to turn on an electrical light on Shabbos. He just didn't say it. And he wants us to figure it out. And whatever we decide based on the rules of the Masorat, that becomes the halacha. Sort of the point of this whole thing is that if Torah Shebaal Peh isn't from Sinai, it's not authentic. If some rabbi made it up, 500 years ago, it's just not part of the Torah. And anything that's not revealed as part of Revelation at Sinai is not needed to be kept as part of the Torah. So that's why Chazal are trying to say that it was all said at Sinai. But the question is, how was it said? Was it actually that God told us every single thing, and then we just forgot it all? Or maybe he didn't say it all, and he wants us to figure it out, and he will only give us the foundation and the tools that we can use to develop this Torah Shebaal Peh. So, I'm not saying how there are different views on how to take this. I sort of prefer this approach, but yeah.
Just the horror on the Ramban. If even within the Ramban, though, right, it's also good to tell students that if you know 1,000%, Chazal are making an obvious mistake. In the Ramban also, it's clear that you don't listen to them.
You don't listen to them. Why?
Even if you think the Ramban is.
But they're really.
Is that the way? Rabbi Sheffer likes to say that was Herman Wook's mistake in the King evening. What the Ramban means is that if you're 95% sure that Chazal made a mistake, then you shouldn't believe yourself. You should follow Chazal. But if you're 100% sure that there's literally an absolute mistake in fact or something, then you shouldn't listen to Chazal.
When you have medical things cited in the Gemara, then anything scientific.
So I think you're actually saying that, okay, so there might be medical observations, but not like the halacha part is.
You rely more on something to bathe.
I think you would change the halacha if it actually.
I'm saying if there's like a factual mistake, there's a 100% factual mistake. Chazal made the mistake 100% factual.
In the Ramban, I think you can read it different ways. I mean, on the one hand he says. Even if it's as simple as your right hand, that they're wrong, you should listen to the Chazal. Which seems like even 100% wrong, you still follow Chazal. And then he says this phrase, Al Dashal Nurosim, which I think is what gives it the rationale. But then, he does say, like, I didn't underline this, but, you shouldn't really go around. I think if someone will go around and be like, Chazal is all wrong, but that's a system, we listen to them anyway. I don't think the Ramban would be comfortable with that. The Ramban said you should believe that Heim Omrim Al Yamin Shel Yamin, Ki Ruach Hashem Al Mashasim V'Tasho. They have Ruach Hashem is above them. V'Lo Ya'azov Es Chasidav. He will not forsake his pious ones. Li'olam Nishmeru Min HaTos Min HaMichshol. They'll always be protected from fallacy, which implies that he doesn't really think that they're all wrong. But maybe if they were, so I'm saying I don't know. Yeah.
But isn't this very dangerous to articulate in a class of high school students that God gave us the Kelim and we're supposed to find the answer because I can see students saying, okay, I read it this way.
Totally hear you. Give me a chance to finish, okay?
Great.
But I definitely agree with that concern. Okay. On the next page, 14, the Lo Basham, this is another source which could sort of go with the Rabbi Akiva story, but that the day that Moshe died, they forgot all thousands of halachos, and they didn't know what to do. And this is where they started Lo Shamayim. They asked, Yoshua Sha'al asked God, Lo B'Shamayim, it's too late, we don't have that anymore. Sha'al, Shmuel, that, that's over. Like Revelation's over, we can't go to God for any more clarification about the Torah. Lo B'Shamayim. So what do we do? So the Gemara says, Hichziram, Asnil ben Knav, Mitoch Kotulo, that they figured it out, basically Torah Shebaal, which is, again, they're confronting the issue straight on. They're saying, like, I don't know if they actually forgot thousands of things on that day, but they're saying that the problem of broken telephone, that maybe we don't get anything right from Sinai, is very true, and, they're immediate. Like they're saying, like, the day Moshe died, right? It was all forgotten. And this Ran, I don't know what he teaches Ran, but he does deal with Lo B'Shamayim, and tries to deal with the fact that different views were given at Sinai, and refers to the Gemara in Bava Metzia, which I would teach the Tam Shechnai, first of all, because it's such a well-known story and illustration of Lo B'Shamayim. What's interesting as a point of analysis on this Gemara is that the Gemara presented it, unlike that measure I mentioned before, that God didn't tell Moshe and he left it for us. Here, it's actually different. This is saying that there was an objective truth, right? The coastal measure should shake, and the trees and the Amasamayim. So all the and the Baskol. Why did God give all those communications about the truth in this medrash about the halacha? So obviously, because it's saying that's the truth. Like God can't lie. I can't lie. Was it Rabbi Eliezer? The Das Yachid was correct, so you can't lie if it's incorrect. There is one truth that was given at Sinai that was comprehensive, and the Machlokas represents the fact that one got it right, one got it wrong. But Lo B'Shamayim means it doesn't matter what was revealed at Sinai, because what God wants us to do is use our tools to determine the halacha and follow. And in Tzchuni Banai, we have overcome God and succeeded him in the sense that we changed the halacha and that became the halacha, because that's the system that God made for us. If you turn the page, I have so what I'm sort of bouncing between these two possibilities, that God revealed everything at Sinai, and the whole entire process of Torah Shebaal is passing it on, remembering it, and debating it to figure out what was actually given, and then hopefully we get it right, and if we get it wrong, God says, don't worry, you do your best, and that's the way it's supposed to work. Versus the perspective where God didn't really reveal everything at Sinai, but gave us certain foundational tools that He wanted us to develop and use, and that is Allah, and God didn't reveal anything. And these are two possibilities I think are both worth considering, both like conceptually and educationally. And Halbertal, I have this article that he wrote about this, which is I think which inspired a lot, I think, on this topic. But he discusses it as two different approaches, which I think is true. The Pachad Yitzchak here sort of goes with the idea that God revealed it all at Sinai, and he has this perspective of Shilchas HaTorah is the expansion of Torah. Because you think that it's so bad to forget, and Machlokim, it's actually great, and now they didn't get the opportunity to be involved in rediscovering what God did at Sinai. So he sort of elevates the role that we have in Torah Shebaal as reconstructing Sinai. He doesn't really believe that we can actually, Revelation was at Sinai, but don't be sad that there's Machlokim. This gives us a chance to get involved. Really, in either case, the whole concept of Torah Shebaal gives us more of a role. And what I sort of close the unit with two things. One is Surah 17, Psalm L'cha, when Moshe chiseled the second Luchos. And this is really worth focusing on, I think. Lo hashir Moshe elam b'psalos and shaluchos. Moshe became wealthy, from the diamond business, because he got to keep all the pieces of the luchos that were chiseled out when he carved them. Psalacha, you chiseled them, and Chazal emphasized the fact that Psalacha which is insignificant because the first ones God made, and here Moshe makes them. So so it seems like a significant contrast. And then the Chazal say, Lo nida Torah el Moshe Lazaro, Ksav l'cha, Psal l'cha. Really, Moshe opened the Torah, and for his family, Yerusha. Moshe nog b'Torah, I am Nasal Yisrael. Moshe was generous and shared it with the Jewish people. How generous of Moshe being to share the Torah with the Jewish people, which is this whole measure is very, very strange. Like, first of all, students are like Moshe got rich because he's stuffing his pockets with the pieces of the luchos and I'm gonna sell these and I get down, top bottom down. But I try to emphasize, and both midrashim, Moshe, the Torah was given from Moshe. We don't really get to see the Torah, but I think that the point of the medrash is to say that that you're supposed to take ownership over the Torah, and it's your literally it's yours. He wants it to be yours, and Torah Shebaal Peh is a thing that's ours. And Torah Shebaal Chav, we can't change it. Torah Shebaal Peh, we can change it, and our opinions make a difference. And so I personally like to emphasize the approach that we're actually developing, and it wasn't given a lot. It doesn't really matter in any case. The whole concept, the whole reason for Machloket is that God made people with different opinions, and we should celebrate the fact that we have that we're able to express different views, and the fact that there are different views is a positive, not negative, because it enriches the Torah. Just like in every other area in the world, you don't say it's such a tragedy that there's two opinions about a political issue. It would be a tragedy if no one saw the same possibility. It strengthens the discussion and the study and the pursuit. So, and I think you can even go with this metaphor with the luchos that luchos rishonos. The way the midrashim portray them, luchos rishonos were perfect. God made them; they were more perfect, but they were more godly, and they were less connected to the people. And what God was saying is there's such a thing as a perfection that God creates, and that's the luchos rishonos, and let's keep them in a box somewhere, and we save the first luchos somewhere. But the real goal is to make is psal l'cha, is for us to create the Torah and develop it, and try to make them as close to perfection as possible. Try to make perfection, but we'll never really achieve perfection. But it will be ours, and we'll be engaged, and we'll be involved in it. And I think that's a really way that students can appreciate Torah Shebaal Peh. And what I do close with is this from the Rav Kenny Schiowitz, this long story where he described. When I read this, they die of laughter because he describes. He's I was a little child. My only friend was the Rambam, and he's very I was lonely, and then he describes his father was giving shiur in the hall, and he was listening in the window, listening by the door, and they're talking about me. They were trying to answer the Rambam, and whenever his father would give a good shot at the Rambam, he'd run to his mother's room and he'd say, Dad saved the Rambam again, or whatever. And when they had they couldn't give an answer, he would go crying to his mother and say, "What's going to happen to Moshe?" But my own, and his mother says, "Don't worry, when you grow up, you'll be a good boy. Maybe you'll find an answer." It's really sweet. And I tell them, when I read the story, I'm that's it. You didn't do that when you were a child. That's it. You become salvation. But the concept is that he described, and how the Rav describes being this with all the showed him. He describes it that they're all at the table of Rashi and Tosfos and Rambam and Ravid, and everyone's discussing it. The point is that he makes the conversation of Torah Shebaal Peh so vivid and alive and personal that that's really I think the goal of Torah Shebaal Peh. So so then you also have to emphasize that there are rules, that you can't just say whatever you want. So we can do whatever we want. So I think we should, get rid of this. I think we should get rid of that. So then the challenge is to emphasize that the Masorat works through certain principles, and it always has. That I always say that God revealed at Sinai, the principles. I believe that, but I can't really show you the where it is. But all the principles that have been used in developing Torah Shebaal Peh clearly throughout the entire history of Torah Shebaal Peh are the ones that we're supposed to continue to use. So we can use those in the ways that we have available to us. Doesn't mean that every person can just wake up every morning and do what they want, and that's a nuance that you have to you know, sell. But you know, I think there's a much better approach than just like, you know, Torah is a big mess and we don't understand any of it, and we have all these debates and we just try to do our best. Yeah.
Isn't there also the point that in any discipline you first have to study a whole lot of it to understand how that discipline operates? So it's important to tell the kids you're just entering in now, but after you sit and study for 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 years, you'll be entitled to more of an opinion on how things should operate than your first foray into the pages.
Yeah. That. So the
Just
amount of
like
time,
you wouldn't go to many, you wouldn't offer an opinion if you didn't sit, if you just at first year out of medical school, you wouldn't offer an opinion on how a doctor should be prescribing medication when you just studied high school science and 1 year medical school.
but you will decide if you're interested in this field without going to medical school, hopefully, right? You'll decide whether this is something that speaks to you or something you want to spend your life on without going, by just one high school science classes, you might decide this is what I want to pursue in college or I don't want to pursue in college. So the same way, I totally agree with you. I don't think kids should be like, writing articles with their opinion, about, what changes should make to halacha without learning more. But they're going to decide whether they're brought into the system earlier. So the amount of time that you can tell them to go learn and come back and ask these questions depends on the students. Like you might say 3, 5, 7, 10 years. I might say like 1 year, 2 years. But by 11th grade, if they don't believe it in 11th grade, they're not going to, depending on where they're coming from. But I think this works really best in 11th grade. Yeah.
Yeah. All the sources showing the importance of Torah Shebaal, that it exists, come from that's
the
so,
cynical students
that problem, but I don't think it's cynical.
That's
a real problem.
Okay, it is the whole problem. But if you just
bring it in Josh.
That's why
really helps.
that's I totally agree with you. But that's a challenge. Okay, but that's why I emphasize the kasha tzidisicha, which actually in the pasuk.
But it's not shot.
It's shot that there's some other explanation.
Not really. There are other ways to understand the pasuk.
What?
All the midrash and all these.
Yes.
You really need the midrash.
Well,
in order to get to that.
That's like, okay, if you look at source 4 for a second. So, Aleihem kachol hadvarim asher diber Hashem. So it says, on them, kol hadvarim, all the things, right? V'lamet sherer v'dash baruch hu l'moshe tiktuk Torah, so tiktuk Sofrim, mashal Sofrim asim l'chadesh, Sofrim Megillah, all with the word kachol hadvarim, right? So that's Torah Shebaal peh, right? Like there's no, so that's why I don't quote like 20 midrashim that all say the same thing. Maybe quote one to show that Chazal thought it was important to see themselves as rooted in the Torah. But I don't need 20 of those because I know Chazal believe that they're authentic. But that's why I do think it's worth Kasha Tzidisicha and the Kuzari because they do make that point. But more it's about showing how the process works and that it's a reasonable process and that it's a positive process, than proving that God actually said it in Sinai in oral law.
Right. I think there's like a theological component that you're missing there. That's like there is a level, like some leap of a moon that you need to like first buy into this whole system. It exists, right? It's there.
Yes.
And that's something we don't address a lot with our students.
Correct.
For believing.
Yeah, but they're two, I'm trying to say there's two different things.
Right.
Because also believing that God spoke to Moshe and Sinai, they have to believe that either. So like, what are Torah
It's
effect?
pretty much the same.
Right. But there is a value to showing that the Torah that we are studying makes sense, rather than something never happened and doesn't make sense. But they're two different. Both are important. Yeah.
I just want to say that the source number 3, it's Kasher Divrei Hashem Bahar. Okay, fine. So God said whatever He said in the mountain, and this is it. The other source, the one at Asher Tzidisicha, you can say to the kids, Google it, find me where God. I don't have the answer that Shita was given Halacha Moshe and Sinai, but I have the question: when did God tell me this? When did God tell me about Shita? And then I can develop it into that. The theory is you can point out the lack of
Right.
peace.
Right. Like, that's why I started off by saying that you said explain what the question you're trying to answer is in order for the answer to be meaningful. But if the question is, did God ever speak to man on Sinai? So then this is not addressing that at all, and it's just sort of, yeah.
You can also take the route of just saying it in the legal system, compared to the Constitution. We can't have any body of law that can't be expanded
Right. Right. By the way, with Little Tussor, I don't know how skeptical your students are, but with Little Tussor, if you show them the whole section of the Chumash, Little Tussor can be read in a much more narrow way than Chazal understood. Like it's specifically when you have specific questions, you go to the Sanhedrin to clarify. It doesn't mean that like this is an expanded legislative power to like make new halachos, totally interpret the Torah. But that's why it's good just to do like the Ramban. Yeah.
Why not just show them a piece of Shakespeare and explain to them how there's absolutely no way to understand certain clauses without understanding the context?
Right.
And say, like, you can't understand Torah without understanding the context, without understanding the oral law.
Right.
Like, show them Ulysses. Like, show them things that, like, make no sense without.
Well, how do you define context?
I would say, like, historical context, also interpretation. I mean, there are certain things that, like, cultural context.
Yeah.
There's things that were going on in the 1500s and 1600s in Spain and in Europe in general that if you read Romeo and Juliet, it's very basic. Most of our 8th and 9th grade readers read it. There's really no way to sort of understand certain clauses there without it.
Yeah. Okay, but why is Gemara the context of the Torah? This is what students would say to you. I agree with you. And this is a little bit goes to what your point was. Yeah, I believe in interpretation. So first of all, we should throw out the top, the Talmud, which was written many years after the Torah, right? And the Mishnah. Throw it all out, and the rabbis in Europe, 1800s, not having connection to the context of the Torah, right? What you take out is other things from the time when the Torah was given, and read and learn history at the time that the Torah was given, and understand the Torah in the context of that point of history, and then it becomes.
Then it becomes a human affair.
Yeah, and then very little becomes compelling to us. This in the Torah was because this was going on at the time, and this is going on, and nothing
They're
really.
not writing in cuneiform, and they're not running around.
So the Torah context is a good starting way to learn Torah, but it won't get you to believe in Torah Shebaal.
No, but then, my place, then you leave the Torah back in the 2000 millennium. You know,
Right.
if you want it to be a living, breathing, collected document for today, you need to have a systematic way of explaining it throughout the generations. So, yeah, go to Gilgamesh is not going to help you.
And God wanted us to do that. And our Sinai charges us with a mission. Here's the Torah, and work with it through a system that will take it through generations. Right. But you have to believe that God wanted that, not just that,
I think also part of the problem is that you have this gap. You have a written text, Torah, given in whatever year it was given. And the next written text you have
the gap.
You have the gap. So how do I know what was happening? I'll accept the chain from Mishnah till today. And I'll accept it. But where's the connect? You're asking me to rely on oral history.
Right.
Oral.
Right.
And in a very disconnected period.
I think it's a big piece of the puzzle, but I do think that I actually haven't heard that framed that way by students.
I've heard it.
Yeah. I mean, it's yeah.
Still never answered the question of why didn't Hashem make it more simple? Why wasn't it more objective? Why was it written that way?
So I think that God wanted it to be that we're involved. He wanted to be open for discussion and debate and development so that we can make our own and relevant and constantly relevant and continually relevant. And by the way, you come back to the key at the end that what does it mean that he comes here, he doesn't recognize anything. Whether you believe that God told everything to Moshe at Sinai or not, either way, Rabbi Akiva, didn't speak to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So everything he was discussing, Moshe didn't recognize. And then and Tashat Kochel, he was sort of disappointed because he didn't, it's not his Torah, right? And then they say, what's the source? Moshe Sinai, right? Why is that an answer? Like all that means, if he doesn't recognize it, obviously all it means is that there's a mistake, right? But the answer is this: is that everything that they were learning was rooted in Sinai. And I say it's like kind of like Einstein comes to a class, a physics class today. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know what this internet thing is, or anything. And then they say what's the principle that this is all built on? They say Albert Einstein. And he says, that's his knowledge. And Moshe realized that everything was authentically rooted in the process that started with Sinai, and we still see ourselves as rooted that way and basing ourselves on his principles. And that's really what it's all about. And anyway, thank you very much. Have a great day. Yeah.
I forgot which source it was, but one thing you said that the doctor was published. How do you explain this with this? Like, how do you explain that properly? You're taking it literally, or do you view it as value? Greater than value?
Did I say that?
One of the sources. Maybe the others.
Here, everything else for the day is here. We'll take a snack or something. Well, every.
Find out.